Now it's time to introduce our keynote speaker, Ken Shaw. Ken Shaw is the Vice President of Supply Chain for Boeing Global Services. He is responsible for high quality, efficient, and repeatable delivery of services, as well as innovation and technical development for advanced service offerings for the customer. Previously, Ken served as Vice President and Managing Director of Boeing Defense Australia. Boeing Defense Australia is Boeing's largest operation outside the US, with more than 2,000 employees across 14 Australian sites and 3 international locations. Ken has held positions of increasing responsibility across Boeing's defense and space programs. These have included leadership roles in supplier management, supporting space and intelligence systems, homeland security, and integrated defense advanced systems. And you know what? Ken is also a graduate of USC. So, would you please join me in giving a warm welcome to Ken Shaw.
What he failed to mention is I'm also a graduate of UCLA, but not a surprise. So I'm going to have a few quick remarks this morning. We're running a few minutes late, and I want to respect General Petraeus' time. So what I'd like to do is start at the start of what this industry was. It was an industry of innovation, started a little over a century ago with the Wright brothers. Then you had people like Bill Boeing, Jack Northrop, and you could go on and on, Donald Douglas, later on Howard Hughes. And I would tell you that a few of the attributes that they had were innovation. Who would have thought the aerospace and defense industry would look like it is today 100 years ago? Most of our founders were steeped in heavy engineering, mathematics, science, technology, an area that we'll talk about today at length. So as we, as the Boeing company, celebrated our centennial in July of last year, we started looking at what is in store for our next century. What are we going to be for the next 100 years as a corporation? Because many corporations, as many of you would know, struggle in their second century. Many of them don't make it in their second century. And especially when you go from an industry that 30 years ago when I started in the supply chain field, you could draw a circle usually within 50 miles of the manufacturing facility to find your supply chain. And if you think about Southern California at the time and what was being produced in El Segundo, in Long Beach, in Palmdale, at Edwards, in Pico Rivera, and the list goes on, it was a very, very vibrant industry. But that was also an industry that was pre-internet. 3D modeling was just being invented on some of the defense programs. The world has changed. And now we talk about global supply chains. We talk about innovation in a different context. Even 30 years ago, who would have thought about an industry that is focused on cybersecurity? When I grew up as a buyer, you would hand carry the drawing package to your supplier. You didn't have cyber to worry about, right? And the networks that we did have predominantly were in-house, and they were highly secure because they were intranets. Now everything goes across the World Wide Web. And now cybersecurity has changed from something new and being talked about to not only a business opportunity for many companies, but also a business imperative for our global supply chain. So, as another business imperative is cost. We are competing collectively as one team on cost around the world. Just remember, not too long ago, our commercial airline industry was highly regulated. That's code for no competition. Think about our defense industries. Not too long ago, we had new starts going on all the time. Just think about all the simultaneous programs that were launched just in the 80s. You had F-22, you had B-2, you had the renovation of B-1B, and the list could go on and on and on. Today, we count the big starts in defense on one hand a decade, right? Congratulations to Northrop winning long-range strike. But that's a once-in-a-decade opportunity. And so that's why you see fiercer and fiercer competition in the defense sector, and you see globalization and fiercer competition in the commercial sector. And so how do we deal with that as an organization? And how do we deal with that as an ecosystem? So in our second century, not only do we want to be the best in aerospace, we want to be a global industrial champion, because we consider competing against the broad world to give us a competitive advantage in the aerospace sector. And also, I would tell you, while you could sit here and talk about doom and gloom in the aerospace sector, if you add up the collective backlog of Airbus, Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, the Boeing company, just those 4 companies, it's over $1 trillion. You're talking about a market that over the next 20 years is $7.5 trillion. Those are large numbers. The backlog at the Boeing company sits today north of $450 billion. It is an investment opportunity for many companies. But it is an industry that is tough. We have the highest standards on cost. We have the highest standards on quality. Let's not forget what we do every day. We put the men and women of our armed services, as well as our NATO and other partner coalition forces, in harm's way. And every time they launch an airplane, they launch a mission, our job is to make sure they come back secure. And think about commercial air travel. Many of you were probably traveling yesterday. Did you worry about the safety of what you were flying on? Probably not, because it's designed and produced by the best minds in the world. So as we go on as a company, let me reflect on my last year and a half in Australia as we talk about globalization. The Boeing company's largest operating entities are outside the U.S. are in Australia. We have more than 3,500 men and women in Australia, 2,000 on the defense side, just under 1,500 on the commercial side. We do commercial fabrication of high technology composites in Australia. Every part we build in Australia is an export back to our factories in the U.S. So I was in our factory a week ago Monday in Melbourne, and I was impressed by, every time I go there, because it's not one of our factories on the defense side, every time I go there I'm amazed at the innovation that they're making around being cost competitive on a global nature. Robotics, high efforts, investments in robotics, in automation, and using the brainpower of our teams to help design the right systems and processes so the robotics could be highly effective. And the list goes on. We also, down in Australia, are doing some things that nobody else in the world is doing, and that is we are surveying oil wellheads autonomously. So think about that. Huge landmass of Australia, very sparsely populated. Some of the big oil and petroleum companies, Shell, BP, and the list goes on, they have oil fields that are largest states in the U.S. And they had people driving from oil head to oil head doing inspections. People were getting killed. They were inspecting 3 to 4 wellheads a day. Through autonomy, they're now doing 100 a day. So when you start thinking about autonomy, robotics, automation, it's not being just done here, it's being done around the world. But when I think about our home turf, and I think about the supply base that the Boeing company enjoys in Southern California, more than 3,000 suppliers, we spend on an annual basis in Southern California just shy of $7 billion a year. That's a lot of money, right? And so how do you become part of that if you're not part of it? If you are part of it, how do you continue to grow with us as we grow as a company? We have aspirational goals to double the size of our company over the next 10 years. So how are you part of that? And how are you and I would submit to Lockheed's supply chain, Northrop's supply chain, Airbus's, and the list goes on and on. How do you do it? 100% quality, 100% delivery. That is a must. That's not aspirational. So how do you get there if you're not there already? Because what this business is built on, as many of you know, is trust. It's built on relationships. And trust is when we can have a conversation about how to make things better, how to make things quicker, how to make things cheaper, using innovation to drive competitiveness versus having conversations about performance. And then when you also look at it, it's about how do we stay secure? Nobody wants their data in somebody else's hands. So cybersecurity of our supply chain is critical. Cybersecurity of your own factories, of your own offices, and the list goes on. And then we also have regulatory requirements that have continued to grow over the last decade or two. And also, as we're playing in a worldwide stage, European regulation is becoming more and more important as well, and we have to all face into that. So how do we go partner? I would tell you we partner through innovation. Help us become better. All the great ideas are not born inside the Boeing company. The great ideas come from the minds of the people in the industry. Those young kids. I had the opportunity last week at Avalon Air Show, which is the biggest air show in the Southern Hemisphere down in Australia. We got to introduce Growler at the beginning of the week. Lockheed got the privilege of introducing F-35 at the end of the week. So just think about the bookends of that air show and how important that is. During that air show, we had many dignitaries come through the Boeing stand and the Boeing chalet. We had a 24-year-old and a 25-year-old getting the Minister of Defense in Google goggles, HoloLenses, doing virtual reality wargaming. Not me, not my chief engineer, not their senior manager. It's those kids that put their heart and soul into school. They did a lot of these things on their own time because they're being innovators. They have passion for what they're doing. And then right after we had Maurice Payne do that, we had the Chief of Defense Force, Mark Binskin. And for any of you that know Benny, he's like, yeah, I want to do this. We had to drag him off the stand because he was having so much fun when he finally was playing air traffic controller, then he was doing air battle management controller. But it's about that innovation. And that's what is going to allow all of us to win in the future. And it's going to be around continuing to drive the STEM activities, as well as the manufacturing apprenticeships programs in this country. We need to reach deeper and deeper into the pipeline than we ever have before, to the elementary schools, to the middle schools, to the high schools. No longer can we go on campuses when kids are in their junior year and hope we can attract enough resources that have the right qualifications to lead this industry for the next century. So I would ask all of you to work with us, work with everybody else in this industry as we redouble our efforts on STEM, we redouble our efforts on innovation, and we continue to focus on quality, productivity, because all of those things will lead to innovation. That innovation will help us all win in our next century and will allow us to compete on a global scale. So with that, I'm going to end my talk so we can get General Petraeus up here so you guys get your money's worth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. It is my pleasure to introduce the next speaker, Neeraj Sood. Professor Sood is Vice Dean for Research at the Price School, USC Price School. He's also Director of Research at the Schaeffer Center for Health Policy and Economics. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Sood.
I know I stand between you and a very interesting conversation with Ken and General Petraeus, so I'm going to keep my remarks very brief. Good morning, and I'm here to welcome all of you on behalf of Dean Nott and the Saul Price School of Public Policy at USC. So you might wonder that, as a public policy school or as a university, why am I not in the classroom? And why am I so excited that one of our research centers is the leader of AMP SoCal and has organized this meeting? And the answer to that is because it's very consistent with the mission of the school. The mission of the school is to improve the quality of life for people and their communities. And we think that a thriving aerospace and defense industry will help us meet this mission because it will have far-reaching consequences. It's going to bring back advanced manufacturing jobs to Southern California. It's going to make our nation safer. It's going to enrich our communities through better economic opportunities. And as Ken mentioned, that innovation is the engine of long-term economic growth. And a thriving aerospace and defense industry is going to spur technological innovation or is going to spur technological change, which is ultimately the engine of economic growth. So we also know that it's not enough for us to just sit in our ivory towers and do our research or go to DC and Sacramento. True change happens when we form public-private partnerships. As Tom mentioned, that we need local and customized solutions, and as a university, we are very happy to be part of this important public-private partnership.